Today's video is going to be a re-ranking video of all of my Colourpop palettes in my collection. I have recently accumulated a few more Colourpop palettes over the past year or so. I got 3 last year and I just got 1 this year, and I'm already ready to rank the one that I just got this year. Since I've tried out all of the shades, I'm ready to tell you guys my updated thoughts about my most purchased eyeshadow palettes in my collection, and the most palettes in my collection are obviously Colourpop's palettes. They just suck me in, and they end up being a consistent formula every single time, and they have become one of my all-time favorite formulas. So I figured I would give you guys an updated version of my ranking video of the one I filmed. I think last March or April was the last time I filmed a Colourpop ranking video. I did get 3 new palettes last year from Colourpop, and I did get 1 from Colourpop this year. I figured I would do it in the beginning of each year, just so like if I do end up purchasing more palettes, because I think I am going to at least add 2 more palettes to my collection this year. I'm going to keep it down to 3 palettes a year from Colourpop. I think that's a good balance, where I get 1 in the beginning of the year, then 1 towards the middle, and then 1 towards the end. It depends on what they come out with. So I have 14 palettes to rank for you guys. That is the most of any brand in my collection. Just Colourpop gets me, like, so yeah, we're just gonna start, and we have a variety of different palettes. We have the 9 pans, we have the 12 pans, we have the 15 pans, and then we have 1 30 pan palette. I think you guys are already gonna know what number 1 is. It's pretty much never gonna change, but the rankings of the palettes under are have definitely changed, and I'm definitely going to update you guys on those. So number 14 comes in with the Colourpop Main Squeeze palette. Now, there isn't anything actually wrong with this palette, honestly. If I rank these palettes lower, it's honestly all has to do with how much I reach for a palette, and the only reason why I'm ranking this one a little bit lower than the one above it, even though the one above it I didn't reach for as much as this one, but I only used this probably like 2 or 3 times last summer, because I ended up reaching for another 9 pan that I thought that I didn't like as much as this one, that I actually ranked a bit higher this time, because I used it way more last summer than I did this one. I really didn't use this all that much last summer, so I'm kind of thinking it, or like kind of ranking it as a, you know, like how much I use the palette, and, you know, what palette am I actually going to be using. Like for Colourpop palettes, I'm never going to end up selling them. They're always going to stay in my collection. Like Colourpop palettes are good enough for me to always keep in my collection because they have a consistent enough formula, and I still reach for them the most out of any of my palettes in my collection. So yeah, number 14 is the Main Squeeze palette. Now, I do really like this palette, and I do think you can get a good variety of looks out of this palette. I really love the red tones in this palette. I really love like these orangey tones, some of these neutral shades, and I really like some of the, you know, shimmer shades. Like there's nothing really that wrong with this palette. The only thing is that I find that this palette is much drier than most of the other Colourpop palettes that I'm going to be mentioning. I feel like this matte red is very dry, a little bit hard to blend out. Same thing with the Home Slice shade. It's like kind of a dry shimmer, but it still applies beautifully. And then some of these matte shades here are also very dry. So I could notice that this is my first 9 pan palette. From this first palette all the way up to the newest palette that I've gotten, which is the Ornate palette, I can tell how much their formula has gotten smoother and butterier and easier to work with. I feel like they just keep on improving the formula, that you can definitely tell a difference between this one and the newer ones. And this palette is already probably, by this summer, this palette's going to be almost 2 years old already. So that is kind of crazy, but it's adorable. I love the packaging. I loved the collection for the watermelon theme. I thought it was adorable. There was a lot of controversy about this palette when it first came out, though, that there was no green shade in it. But I do really love the shades that they put in here, but honestly, I feel like they could have swapped out like this pink frosé shade for a green shade, or maybe they could have taken out some of these neutrals and added like a light matte green with like a light or a dark green shimmer, and then added like another pink. And then I feel like this palette would have been perfect. So like just the shade selection is a little bit lackluster for me as well, but they're still really, really good. I still really love the colors in the palette. I just wish that, you know, they kind of listen to people. But sometimes Colourpop just goes their own way. So, okay. So number 13, I am really surprised that I'm ranking this palette so low now, but honestly, it only has to do with how much I actually used this palette last year. And I can't really remember, honestly, picking up this palette more than once or twice last year. And I really do like this palette as well. But as far as it comes to like versatility of looks and stuff, like there was at one point when I had gotten this palette, when I first got it, that I was using it like heck, and I was really inspired to create looks with this palette, and I was using it a lot. But as far as like versatility goes and usability and being able to use it on a day-to-day basis, it's just not a palette I really reach for anymore. I only keep it because I love the theme of it, and this is the Colourpop and Kathleen Light's the Zodiac palette. Now, if you were to ask me about Kathleen Light's palettes before I got the So Jaded palette, I'd be like, this is my favorite one. But not anymore. This is definitely my least favorite, but I love the packaging. There's nothing wrong with the theme of this palette. I just wish that the color selection of the palette was a little bit different. I mean, it is a beautiful, unique color story, and that's why I love Kathleen Light's collaborations with Colourpop, with the Dream Street, with Zodiac, with So Jaded. They're always a unique color story, and she really does a great job of putting together really unusual palettes, and that's why I love her palettes and why I've collected all of them, because like I feel like no one else, if they collaborated with them, would really come up with these like random selections of shades, and I really think that they're very inspiring and they kind of get you out of your comfort zone. But as you guys know, I loved the concept of this palette because I love zodiac signs, I love birthstones, I love all that stuff. So this was a no-brainer for me to pick up, and this was my second palette ever from Colourpop. So this was my first 9-pan. This was like my 5th palette from Colourpop, and this was my second palette because the first palette I ever got was Dream Street. So the first year that I started picking up Colourpop palettes, I only got 3, and then the year before last year I got 7, and then I got 3 this past year, and then I've gotten 1 this year already. So that's how my collection has grown. But I just feel like the random selection of shades in here makes it very difficult to create a look with this palette. I mean, like, how much can you do with these? I mean, you can create pretty unique looks with this palette, and that's what I like. But I really just don't reach for it that much anymore. I mean, I love this palette because it has a Leo shade in here. Since I'm a Leo, like, I'm never going to get rid of it. But as far as me being inspired to use this, I really don't reach for it anymore. But it's never going to leave my collection because I love it. And you guys can see I've used this a ton. Like, it's not like I didn't get my money's worth out of this palette. I used it a ton. So, there's like just so much kick up around the shades. But, I just don't find myself really being inspired by the color story anymore. Sometimes I reach for this for collabs and stuff. But the only one I did reach for was Pisces. And then I think I used it one other time for work. And I can just tell like the quality has gotten so much better with their formula again, that I feel like if this came out today, I probably would have enjoyed it more, but it's just something that I can't really like see myself using too much anymore. But it's still a really fun, inspiring color story. It was different for the time. I love that it's a zodiac theme. So yeah, so that's why it's at number 13. Okay, so then number 12. I always have a love-hate relationship with this palette, but I do find myself using this quite a bit in the summertime, and I would be lying if I said that I don't reach for this a ton in the summertime, and this is the Colourpop Honey palette. Now, originally I was not going to add this to my collection, but then I kept on looking at it, and this ended up being my, I believe my second, was this my second 9-pan palette? Was it? I can't remember. I think it was. Because I had gotten the main squeeze, and then I think I got the Sunrise palette that summer and that Lion King palette. So this ended up being like my 4th palette like 2 summers ago. So again, this palette's almost 2 years old as well. But I can't say I don't use it a lot. Like, look how much the writing has worn off. Like, I actually used this quite a bit last summer. I created quite a bit of yellow looks with this palette. And I can't say that I don't enjoy using it. I find that the formula of these shimmers are much less dry than the ones in the main squeeze palette. And I just thought that this was a unique color story to my collection because I was like, I really wanted to start creating like bright yellow looks for the summertime. And this was definitely the perfect palette to do it with. The only reason why I always rank this palette a bit lower is because of this shade right here. I really wish they made this a little bit more of a deepening shade. Like it could have been like a mustardy dark brown. And then I feel like this palette would be a lot higher on my list. Because some of the shades can end up looking really similar and I just don't think this color is deep enough. And then there is a pressed glitter in this palette as opposed to the main squeeze, but I do enjoy this pressed glitter a lot. And these 3 shades, Dandy, Sunburst, and Queen Bee, are such gorgeous shimmer shades. So that's why I'm ranking a little bit higher. But I did use this a ton last summer. Like this and the Sunrise palette were still some of my most reached for palettes last summer. So I feel like it's not going to be any different this summer. I think I'm going to pull this palette out quite a bit. But this is the only palette I use when I want to do a yellow look. So that's why it's at number 12. But it does not have enough versatility for me to be ranked higher. And I don't think the formula is their best. But it's a good palette. So I can't say that I don't enjoy using it. Okay. Number 11. Now, this palette is always up and down on my list. I do really like the quality of this palette. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the formula. The only thing is that, again, it has a very different, unique color story that it's not always the easiest to create looks with. And this one is the Disney Frozen 2 Elsa palette. Now, again, nothing wrong with the formula. I freaking love the formula. And I do love using these palettes during the winter time. I'm not going to say I didn't when I picked them up. I used them a ton. I think I also used them a lot. Yeah, I used them a lot last winter. I haven't really used them too much this past winter, which is kind of annoying me because these are usually my winter palettes along with the gold palette. But this is what the palette looks like, and again, it's a super unique color story. This winter shade isn't the best, but I do again love the shimmers in this palette, and the mattes are really, really nice. But as far as versatility goes, this isn't really a standalone palette. I do feel like sometimes I have to bring in other palettes in order to create looks with this. It's not the easiest palette to get a look out of, but the shadows work beautifully. And this silver is one of the most metallic silvers I've ever seen. And these matte reds are beautiful as well. But as far as the colors go, I feel like they could have put some other shades in here to make it a little bit more cohesive. But it does work. And it is a fun, again, a fun color story to get you out of your comfort zone. And it's Frozen. Like, honestly, when I saw this, I was going to pick up just the Anna palette, but I'm like, who am I kidding? I need both. So that's why I ended up picking up both of them. And that's why I ended up picking up like 3 9 pans that are 4, because I got the main squeeze and the Honey, and then I got these 2 palettes at the end of the year. So, but they got me because it was 2019 when Frozen 2 came out. So I was like, there's no way I can say no to those. Okay, number 10. Number 10 is an older palette, but I actually just whipped this out to use it yesterday. This doesn't go for reachability or how much I've used it, honestly. I mean, I've been trying to rank them that way. But this palette has always had a special place in my heart because this is one of my most used palettes ever in my collection. So I can't really rank it any lower. And I feel like you can do way more different looks with this than the rest of the palettes that I'm talking about. So that's why this one is ranked higher. Just because I haven't reached for it basically at all last year doesn't mean that this is not one of their best palettes to me. And this is the Colourpop Dream Street Kathleen Lights and Colourpop palette. This palette was just such a well thought out curated palette. And again, this is my first Colourpop palette ever. I was like, I am definitely getting Kathleen Light's first palette from them because I was super inspired by the color story from this. And this was back when Kathleen Light's, you know, was just getting to be very big. And this was her first collab with them. And I ended up picking up the Ultra Satins from this collection as well. And the lipsticks that she creates with them are always amazing too. But I just thought that this color story, like, when I first saw it, I was like, I don't know how many looks I'm going to be able to create with it. I have made and done so many looks with this palette, and it's always different every single time. I mean, you got your staple neutrals in here, but you have these like beautiful fun pops of color. I love using this color and the blue together in the crease. It's so pretty with this blue shade all over the lid, or sometimes I'll use the silver. And it's just a fun palette to use, or I'll use the blue on the lower lash line with the neutrals. And it's just such a beautiful palette to, you know, just add a little bit of a pop factor. I mean, yes, if you do cover up these 3 shades, it's basically another basic neutral palette if you don't have the blue and you don't have this color, you don't have this color. But the pops in this palette really work. And I actually just ended up whipping it out and using it yesterday. You guys can see the significant dips that I do have in this palette. I finally did hit pan on this shade. This is the only Colourpop palette that I have pan in. That needs to change, but their shadows come with a ton of products. So it is very hard to hit pan on a Colourpop palette because it's a lot of products. So, but yeah, I just used it yesterday and I was like, damn, it's still a really, really nice palette. So, and this palette's like going on, I think, almost 3 years old now, and it still performs beautifully. So that's why this palette comes in at number 10. So now we're getting into some of my favorite palettes from Colourpop. So number 9 is another 9 pan, and this is the Star Wars The Mandalorian Colourpop Pressed Powder Palette. Like, how adorable is this freaking packaging? Like, it's adorable. I love it. There was quite a bit of controversy about this palette. Some people hated it. Some people really loved it. Most people loved it, but they weren't like a huge fan of like the kick up in this palette because it's a very pigmented palette. And I am ranking this a little bit lower because I'm kind of ranking my 9 pans as to how I would rank them. So like these are, you know, not just ranking my Colourpop palettes, but I'm ranking my 9 pan palettes as well from them. So you guys can get a taste of what's my favorite 9 pan. I mean, you're definitely going to see. But I just loved this color story. I thought it was such a unique color story, honestly. It is repetitive. Like, how many times can it be done? But I thought it was so perfect for Baby Yoda. They really did an amazing job on creating the colors for this Baby Yoda palette, and the metallics in here are so freaking stunning. Like this right hand Mando shade, one of the most beautiful Colourpop shades I've ever used. Sipping Soup is also gorgeous, and this shade right here, Precious Cargo, is stunning. And I reached for this palette way more than I thought I was going to. I used it so much when it came out. Like, this was like one of my most used palettes, like in November and December, in most of November, I think is when I got it. And I just loved it. I think it's such a cute, fun palette. And I was really trying to say no to it. And I'm like, who am I kidding? I pick up almost all of their Disney palettes. I have the 2 Frozen, 2 Princess ones, and this one. So I have like 5 of their Disney collab palettes. And I just thought it was adorable. And I thought it would be a really fun, easy way to incorporate greens into looks. And I honestly, like, I love it. The only thing is that the shimmers do transfer a lot easier than some other shimmers from Colourpop. That's why this one's ranking a little bit lower. But I thought that it was a really great, well thought out, curated palette. And it's so freaking adorable. I mean, come on. Like, how could I resist this packaging? I couldn't. So that's why this one comes in at number 9. Okay, number 8 is another very, very controversial. This one's the most controversial Colourpop palette you could ever talk about, but it is a good palette. So this is the Colourpop Gather Round Sisters Hocus Pocus collab palette. Now, for this launch was the messiest launch Colourpop has ever had. I think worse than the Sailor Moon one. But they basically stocked it once on Ulta, and then it disappeared forever. And people were losing their minds that it was never going to be restocked. And then last week, they just snuck in that they restocked the whole collection on Colourpop. And we're like some people were messaging me and they're like, they're doing this because they don't want people to shut down the website if they announce it again. I get that. But the fact that you're restocking it 4 months later, and they knew that this was going to sell out again, no matter how many times they restock it or only restocked it once or twice. I'm like, if they had restocked it at least one more time in October, I don't think people would have been as pissed off about some sneaky, like, restock. So I don't know. I just didn't like that. Like, they're doing some shit that, like, is kind of annoying me now. But we're not going to get into that right now because I still love these palettes. So this one is number 8. And I feel like you can do quite a bit with this palette. I definitely think that this is a one and done type of palette because you have everything from your brow bone highlight in here to like a everyday crease shade to some really beautiful deepening shades here. And this shade right here, I thought that this was such a well thought out palette. Some people think that this is too muted for the Sanderson sisters, but why is it that we need something that has like a ton of color in it when the Sanderson sisters wore more like grungy tones like this? Like, I probably would have put a couple more grungy tones in here, but I think that this works for the Sanderson sisters. I did a Sarah look with the palette, and I thought it worked beautifully. The colors in here looked really similar to what she wore in the movie. And then I feel like these shades would work great for Merryweather. Is that her name? Merryweather, and for the other witch as well. I'm not like the biggest Hocus Pocus watcher, so I always forget their names, but I am a fan of the movie, and I just wanted this palette because I thought that the color story was gorgeous, and I thought that this was a color story that I could get down with from Colourpop, and I'm glad I held out to get this palette. And I also just felt like this palette was so exclusive that I'm like, I kind of wanted to be a part of it, and I ended up snagging it. I can't believe I ended up snagging this. Like, I really wanted to get this for my friend Brittany, and then she didn't get it. And then they ended up restocking it last week, and she probably missed out on it again. So it freaking sucks. I know that she really, really wanted it. And I almost, like, sold this to her. But I'm like, I actually ended up enjoying this way more than I thought. This pressed glitter in Rue Potion is actually stunning. I feel like they did change the formula on the pressed glitters. And these shimmers are beautiful. And these mattes that coincide with the shimmers are stunning. So I really, really like this palette. And these shimmers transfer a lot less than the ones in the Mandalorian palette, so that's why I ranked it higher, and plus you get a lot more color options in this palette. So that's why this one is in at number 8. Okay, the number 7 is another 15 pan palette, and this is the Colourpop Disney Designer. It's a princess thing palette. So we're getting into basically most of the Disney palettes now, because you guys know I love the Disney palettes. So this one is number 7. This is one of the best neutral palettes ever. I love this palette so much, you guys. Like, as you guys can see, I've used the crap out of it. It's a very well-loved palette for me. And again, even though I didn't really use this palette a hell of a lot last year, I did use it a lot for collabs. I used it for the Belle tutorial. I used it for a Disney look, for the princess, like the Sleeping Beauty look. I used it for the, I don't know if I used this from the Maleficent look. I think I just used the So Jaded for that. But this just worked with a bunch of different looks for the Disney themed collabs that I did. And it just performs amazingly. This is when Colourpop was really stepping up their formula. And this neutral palette is just stunning. I definitely think this is, again, a one and done palette. And you think that you really can't do much with it, but I've created so many beautiful looks with this, and these metallics here are amazing. This shade Chip and Ray and One Kiss, some of the best metallics I've ever used from them. They're so buttery and so metallic. And the mattes are beautiful in this palette. And then this bottom row, I love that they put this deepening row in here so you can really like deepen out the look and you can dip your toes into some color. So yeah, loved this palette. Can't really say enough about it. This palette is beautiful. So that's why that one comes in at number 7. Okay, number 6 is one of my favorite 9 pans from Colourpop, and this is the Disney Frozen 2 Anna palette. And the reason why I ranked this one a little bit higher is because the color story is just beautiful, and I do think that the formula is so good in this palette, like better than the Princess Thing palette. I almost made this one number 6, but you know, it's still top 7. So this one is the Anna palette, and the reason why this one ranks much higher than the Elsa one is just because this color story, it's such a, I thought that they curated this palette so well. I really like when they put a decent amount of mattes in the palette. So they put 5 mattes in here and 4 shimmers, which I think is a good ratio. And since they put a pressed glitter in here is the only reason why it's ranked a little bit lower than my other 9 pans. But the pressed glitter in here is really beautiful. But I just thought that these colors were so Anna. And again, the Disney curated palettes, they do such an amazing job on curating the palettes. So I just love the color stories for the Disney palettes. I think that they're different, unique, and I think that they're a great way of playing with color, but still like muted color, but like adding like a pop of color. Like these purples in here, stunning. And then the gold, of course, this warm gold. You guys know I freaking love these kind of shades. And then these mattes are just beautiful. They blend beautifully. And then you have these really beautiful deepening shades in the palette. Like Charades and Autumn Breeze are such great deepening shades for any of these shades in the palette. So I just thought this palette was beautifully curated. And it's one of my favorites. So, but that's why I always rank this one higher than the Elsa one. Because it's really, really good. Okay, now we're getting into the top 5. So this one was one of my most recent, this is my most recent palette to my collection, and it's already shot up to be my number 2 9-pan palette from Colourpop. And this is the Colourpop Into Bloom's Ornate palette. This palette really, really blew me away. It's just so easy to work with. This is the one I'm wearing today because this is my newest palette, so I wanted to wear it today for you guys. It made sense since I'm filming a ranking video. I actually decided to film this video over another video that I was going to film because I'm waiting on Mary to send me swatches. Because we're going to do that guess the palette from the swatch video. But I'm waiting on her to send me more. And I was like, wait, I can film my Colourpop ranking video today. So yeah, this one is number 5. I really, really didn't think I was going to love this palette so much. I was like, oh, it just looks like another basic warm tone neutral palette for me, but these matte shades are so rich and beautiful, and I love that they put like these deepening shades in here. And I do like that this palette is a majority of mattes and less shimmers, which the 9 pans sometimes are lacking more mattes. And you gotta have at least 4 to 5 mattes in a palette in order for a palette to work, I feel like. And I'm glad that they put 5 mattes in here with a black, which this black is also stunning. And then they put 3 shimmers in here, and these shimmers are beautiful. But these mattes just work so well with the shimmers, and I've created such beautiful looks with it. So today I'm using Siren in the crease. Then I darken up the crease more with Charisma, and then I used Tipsy on the outer corners. And then I put Gilded all over the lid, and then I put Bohème on my inner corners, and then Just Hear Me Out on the brow bone, which is one of my singles. And this Gilded shade, it looks like it's just like a shimmery ivory color in the pan, but when you put it on your lid, it transforms to like this beautiful like yellow shimmer, and it's so pretty. So this palette really blew me away. I mean, I figured I was gonna love it because hello, I love Colourpop palettes, but when I saw Mary swatch this in her video when she got the palettes, she actually picked up all 3 and she gave Colourpop another chance. And I was like, girl, the formula got really, really good now, and I really think you're going to love these. And she was like, I love them. So she basically, I mean, I had my eye on this palette ever since it came out, and I was like, this collection is so stunning. I was like, I have to get this palette, and I love it. This is definitely going to be one of my most used palettes up until like April, because I feel like it's such a beautiful palette for the fall and winter. I mean, I didn't pick it up until the winter time, but it's stunning. So yeah, that's why it went all the way up to number 5, and also because there's no pressed glitter in here. So really, really beautiful. I've been loving that palette. Okay. Now, top 4. I mean, the top 3 haven't really changed too much, all except one crept in there to be number 2. So let's see if you guys can guess. So number 4 is the Colourpop Sweet Talk palette. I think you guys know I freaking adore this palette. This is one of the best palettes they've ever come out with. And let me just go ahead and show you guys real quick, because I don't want this color to come out. Some of the Super Shock shades in these palettes just like to pop out. Those are the ones that I find that are the hardest to stay in the palettes. But just look at this color story. It just screams spring, and I just freaking love this palette so much, you guys. I am so glad I picked this up as like my 4th or 5th Colourpop palette. Maybe it was like my 4th, because I think I got it, yeah, like way early on, not last year, but the year before. Like, I think this is almost 2 years old also. I think this April will make it 2 years old. But this color story is just amazing. I love using these warm pink shades for like this beautiful rose gold look. I love these matte tones. They have these beautiful deepening tones. They have these beautiful like pinky tones. I just love everything about this palette. I love the goldeny tones. Just an amazing palette. This is my favorite spring palette to use, and it's one of my favorite curated palettes from Colourpop, and this is a 12 pan, but this is one of their most popular palettes for a reason. It is freaking stunning. I love the pressed glitter, the Super Shock shadow in here. I love the shade Melody. It's such a gorgeous gold. I love the shade Garden Date, and then these mattes are so well curated to go with these shimmers. So I love it. I just freaking love this palette. So, all right, 3 more palettes to go, and then me and my family have to make dinner. So hopefully I can finish within the next 10 minutes. Okay, number 3. So number 3 is my favorite Disney palette from Colourpop. I love this palette so much. It's amazing. So number 3 is the Disney Designer Midnight Masquerade palette. What's so funny is that this and my number 1 pick, I was going to skip over these palettes, and then they end up becoming my favorite Colourpop palettes. And I'm like, Caitlin, you would have really regretted if you didn't get these palettes. So number 3 is the Midnight Masquerade. This one is like a year or so old, but I love it. This palette is so richly pigmented, and honestly, in all my Colourpop palettes, there is little to no duds in every single palette because they just blend so beautifully. Their formula is so easy to use, and just because there's a pressed glitter in here doesn't mean I don't love this palette any less. It's just, there's such richly pigmented shades in here. This bottom row makes the whole palette for me. These are such gorgeous, rich mattes. Oh my god, so beautiful. Gaston, beautiful matte red, and then these shimmers. Mama Odie, gorgeous. It's like this beautiful, like dual chrome green shade, and then of course Mrs. Potts, that yellow gold. I mean, hello. And then Frog and Wife, beautiful green shimmer, and then this shade Dolgy, such a beautiful peachy tone, and then Spinning Wheel is a beautiful duochrome pink. And I was like, I can't believe I was going to skip over this. I'm like, it has Sleeping Beauty shades in here. So I'm like, I have to get this because you guys know Sleeping Beauty is my favorite. And it has Tangle shades in here and more Belle shades. So I just love this palette so much. And it had some Enchanted shades too. So this palette was just such a fun palette for princesses that we have not seen being featured before from Disney. So they had Esmeralda, they had Giselle, they had Rapunzel, and they had Sleeping Beauty. And I was just like, I need everything in this collection. This was one of their most beautiful collections they ever came out with. And I freaking love it. I thought I had an insert in here. Oh, it's right here. Adoing. I'm like, it has that unique shape to it. How could I lose it. But yeah, this palette is stunning. The packaging, everything about this collection was just stunning. This is one of my favorite collections they've ever come out with. So I was like, I need that palette in my life, and I'm so glad that I got it. It's just such a beautiful palette, and I did use this a ton for collabs as well. Okay, so top 2. You guys already know what my number 1 is, but my number 2, what's the palette that I haven't really talked about yet? That is newer to my collection, that I raved about last year. I'll just give you a second. Okay, so number 2 is my favorite 9-pan palette from Colourpop, and this is the Colourpop Going Coconuts palette. I cannot believe, like, again, this palette I was not going to get. And then I kept on seeing Andrew Mattiliano rave about this palette that I'm like, this looks like such a beautiful neutral tone palette. And honestly, as you guys can see, I don't have too many neutral palettes from Colourpop. A lot of them are like warm tone pinks or like deeper warm tone shades or pops of color with the Disney palettes because they're beautiful. Or I have a red tone or a yellow tone palette. So I was like, I don't really have an everyday neutral palette from Colourpop. So I was like, I kind of want to try one. And this just blew me away with the quality. But I just find that this palette, if I brought this traveling or if I brought this anywhere and I just knew I was just going to do laid back looks, but this is such an easy everyday palette to use. Like, I used this a ton last year and it's just such an easy palette to use. Like, I don't even have to think about my look. 1, 2, 3 out the door. I mean, even though we weren't really rushing anywhere last year, but this palette was just my go-to last year. I loved it. These metallics are stunning and the mattes in here are just amazing. I love that there's more mattes again in this palette than there are shimmers. That's why the Ornate palette is my other favorite, because I do actually prefer more mattes in their 9-pan since it's only 9 colors. But you got a brow bone highlight in here. You got these beautiful crease shades. You got this deepening shade that you can deepen up any look in this palette. And then these 3 metallics are beautiful. Like this shade, Cocoa Crush, one of my all-time favorite shades from Colourpop. And then you have this shade and this shade to deepen up any look. And then these 4 mattes work with anything. And then these shades are just, they're just stunning. I can't say enough good things about this palette. If you need a good standard neutral palette from Colourpop, this is your guy. If the bare necessities is too overwhelming for you, just this palette is all you need. I love it so much. So, I mean, like, I don't think you guys were expecting that this was going to be ranked any lower, because this palette is just the one. And then the one, the only, the one that will never lose its crown, because I still use this palette the most out of all my palettes in my collection last year. What do you think was the palette I still used the most? I don't know if you guys are getting sick of me talking about this palette, so I'm really not going to talk about it too much, but it's number 1. Do I even have to talk about it? I don't know. I'll talk about it a little bit, but I don't want to annoy you guys for talking about this palette so much. It's just like, I have created an endless amount of looks with this palette, especially with the Birthstone series that I'm doing with Riri this year. It really has been getting me to use a lot of the shades in here that I haven't been able to use, because where we going? Okay, where we going this year? But it's been such a fun series to do, and you guys know I just love it. Like, look how unique this color story is. I don't know. Maybe there are other color stories out there that are similar, but the formula across the board in this palette, phenomenal. Every single shade is so freaking beautiful. I mean, Peridot, I was not going to get this because I was like, this is too overwhelming. There's too many shades in this palette, but this became my one and only favorite 30-pan palette from Colourpop, but it's just the best. I love it. It's just, the quality's phenomenal. The matte shades in here are stunning, and the lid shades are just chef's kiss. Amazing. This shade Emerald, Smoky Quartz, Amethyst. There is just endless amount of looks you can create with this palette. I'm just holding it a little bit tilted because this did pop out the last time I used this palette. So, but it's just amazing. I love it so much. I cannot keep on talking about this palette forever. But if I need one palette, I swear this palette and the Going Coconuts palette are the only two palettes I ever need to take with me anywhere because I'm set with these two. Or sometimes I'll take the Midnight Masquerade just to have some pinks. So that's why these are my top three. If I need 3 palettes to go to my best friend's house, these are the 3 palettes I'm taking with me because I always know I have everything I need in those 3 palettes. That's why they're my 3 favorites. But yeah, this palette is just, it does it all and I love it, and it's just always is going to be my #1 favorite palette ever. This sits on my bookcase and I use it once a month for the Birthstone series. I even used it a couple of times for work last year, and it's still my most used palette. I love it so much. And that is it, you guys. That is all of my newer Colourpop palettes ranked, even though I only got another 4. I thought it would be fun to rank them again for you guys and to share with you guys my updated thoughts. And yeah, that's it, you guys. So I love you guys. Let me know what your favorite Colourpop palette is. If you are over Colourpop, if you love Colourpop, what is your favorite palette? I would love to know. And what is your least favorite? So yeah, I love you guys. Please like and subscribe. Follow me on my Instagram at CBW819 so we can talk and chat. And I love you guys. Bye.